Hello, this is Andrew with Missing Remote. Today we have a couple of Shell Recharge EVSE. This is a 40 amp model and this is the 32 amp model. They are actually made by a company called Sky Intelligent. It's a Chinese company and they're sold in the United States under the Shell Recharge branding. Shell is making a big push to be green. They recently bought an EV charging company as well. And this is part of their effort to enter this space, this electric car space. I don't know the exact nature of the relationship between Shell and Sky Intelligent, but just be aware that in the United States and I believe Canada, if you're buying something branded as Shell, if you're buying consumer electronics, hello, this is Future Me. After shooting this part of the video, I learned a bit more about the relationship between Shell and Sky Intelligent. It's not as crystal as I thought initially. Shell Recharge branding in the consumer electronics space is not strictly tied to Sky Intelligent. There are other companies in related green device industries that also use Shell Recharge branding in North America. I don't know where the exact demarcation lies, and it's not really important to this discussion. The key takeaway here is that Shell Recharge is branding. These are Sky Intelligent devices, and they make and support these in the North America market. These are fairly expensive. This one, the 40 amp, goes for $500. The 32 is sold for $450. There are often coupons available on Amazon, which is their primary sales channel, that drop that down by $50, but it's still fairly expensive for a portable EVSE. The Shell name might be part of that, which is a reason, but not one that I really care a ton about. There are a few other likely candidates that we'll discuss as we move through the review. Obviously, everyone will need to decide if that price is reasonable for themselves. But personally at $450, because I waited for the coupon, I thought it was something I could live with. So let's take a look at what you get. You get this nice case, which fits very conveniently in the front of my Mach-E. You get a NEMA 1450 to 515P adapter, which can be used with 15 or 20 amp receptacles. You get some of these velvet bags, and you get little plastic covers for the plugs, and then a manual and some kind of warranty registration card. So let's take a look at the layout of the EVSE. You get a display. Obviously it's not turned on right now. I'm going to show an image of what you would expect to see if this was plugged in. Up there you get to see quite a bit of information about what's going on, the temperature of the unit, its advertised current, the current that is currently being provided or pulled by the car, how long it's been charging, how many kilowatt hours it's delivered to the vehicle, and then the current kilowatt delivery to the vehicle. You have two buttons, this A button, which controls the level of current that's advertised to the car, and then a timer button that controls for some basic features around like how you would schedule charging. So this EVSE is IP67 rated, so that's fine for outdoor use, but obviously just on 240 volt. If you're using the 120 volt adapter, it is not weatherproof in any way. There are ways to work around that, but that is a topic for a different video. The whole thing is 30 feet in total length from plug to plug, which is awesome. And another reason why it probably costs a bit more. Most portable EVSE are around 20 to 25 feet in length, and this UL listed cabling is very pricey. This is another reason why I thought it was worth paying more for this portable EVSE. You never know. That extra 5 to 10 feet could be the difference between happy electrons and a long wait for someone to move their car, or potentially having to make do with level 1 because you can't get close enough to the 240 volt socket. So let's have a chat about ergonomics. This guy is heavy. It's about 20 pounds. And that's not a bad thing per se. You want these cables to be thick. Bigger wires will manage heat better and be more efficient. Thick doesn't have to mean stiff though, and this is one area, at least where the 40 amp is slightly problematic. In cold weather, it can get stiff to the point where it's difficult to extend it fully or get it nicely wrapped up into the carrying case. It doesn't even have to be that cold for you to start noticing a difference, but as you get into sub-freezing temperatures, you definitely will have to grapple with it a bit. The charge gun is nice. It feels good in the hand, and I like the rubberized portions on the front and the back. The dust water cover is nice as well. I've left it outside during several rainstorms, and it just does the business. There's also a padlock hole in the latch to make it slightly more inconvenient for someone to pull it out of the car. One thing I noticed though is that this internal washer is fairly firm. I'll throw a picture up here of what I mean. It's this red part inside of there. When I first started using the EVSE, it took quite a bit of pressure to get it to fully engage in the car's charge port. It has loosened up over time, so it's probably just something to be aware of in the beginning. Looking at the EVSE itself, the body is fine, the display is nice with all the necessary information displayed like current, energy, dispersed, charge time, etc. The only major complaint I have with this is with the mounting hole on the back here. It's not great. There's only one of these things, and you don't want to hang this whole assembly off of the receptacle. It's not going to be good for it or the outlet. Given the price point of this EVSE, I would expect that some better mounting solution would be available, like a bracket. That would have been awesome. The last thing I wanted to mention is that the plug design has changed. A well-known reviewer in this space mentioned the problem with this version of the plug where it can become detached from the cabling if it's tugged. That was the older design. The newer version, this guy, has a molded plug which should address the problem. Hopefully you can see the difference between these two configurations. The main reason I bought this one, the 40 amp, was because it is a fully adjustable EVSE that can work on 120 volt or 240 volt at 12, 16, 24, 32, or 40 amps. You should be able to use it anywhere. If you go for the 32 amp, it does all of that, just minus the 40 amps. So let's talk about why you might want an adjustable EVSE. Basically, it provides the flexibility to charge anywhere, as long as you have the right set of adapters. In an ideal world, every EV would allow you to select any of those amperages, but most don't. Even our Kia EV6, which does allow some basic selection there, one, it doesn't tell you what the amperages that you can choose are, and two, it does not provide that full level of flexibility that one would necessarily want for full peace of mind. So having the ability to go 12, 16, 24, 32, or 40 amps is fantastic. Setting the current manually is handled by pressing the A button. When I bought it, I was under the impression that it was supposed to do some kind of automatic current detection, but I haven't been able to make that work. I mostly based that on reviews that I saw, but it's somewhat sort of documented in the manual. But like I said, I haven't been able to get it to work. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to test the higher risk 240 volt side of things, but 120 volt doesn't change the advertised value to the car. It defaults to 16 amps when I plug it into a 20 amp or 15 amp circuit. And it will happily let the car pull 14 amp on a 15 amp configuration. Where if it did automatic current sensing properly, it should be dropping down to 12, which is 80% of the max load for the line. Personally, I don't think this is a massive issue, more of a thing to be aware of. You can tell if it's a 15 or 20 amp receptacle by looking at it. And in general, a NEMA 1450 receptacle should be good for 40 amps continuous because there's a 50 amp circuit attached to it. It is NEC code that you are allowed to use a 1450 on a 40 amp circuit though, which should be run at 32 continuous. I would hope that this would be marked clearly on the receptacle because the default for NEMA 1450 is 50 amp. It's what the 50 is in the name. If you're using a plug adapter to connect anything up, then you should know what the configuration is. And no matter what you're doing, you want to make sure that you set the advertised amperage on the EVSE before plugging the car in. So now let's have a look at the cable differences between the 32 and 40 amp. It basically comes down to the gauge or width of the cable, with the 40 amp being significantly heavier, as it should be. I have some calipers here. We'll just do a quick measurement. So the 40 amp is 20.1 millimeters and the 32 is 16.4. Now is probably a good time to mention how I ended up with the 40 amp and 32 amp version of this EVSE. I bought this guy several months ago and fairly quickly noticed some issues with my Mach-E. We don't need to get into the details too deeply, but in brief, the most noticeable problem was that the relays would click repeatedly when the car was connected but not charging, which, as they are a wear item, would not be good for the longevity of the EVSE. As I was working through the review, I contacted Sky Intelligence product support, half expecting them to tell me that I was holding it wrong. But instead of that, after exchanging a few troubleshooting emails on the topic, they put me in touch with their US support representative who happens to live in the Chicagoland area. Long story short, he came to my house several times and I worked with him and the product group to test a series of software revisions which fixed the initial issues with my Mach-E, a few others that surfaced with our EV6, and some minor cosmetic concerns. I cannot stress how awesome that was. No product is perfect. Everything has issues. That is normal. What isn't normal, unfortunately, is how quickly Sky Intelligent took ownership and displayed an ongoing desire to get it right even as more issues surfaced. That was amazing. They clearly wanted to deliver the best product that they could and were willing to do what it took to get there. Kudos. Unfortunately, that means that there are versions of these EVSE in market that won't work right with every car. So it is worth paying attention to the behavior of yours, if you get one, and the software revision of the EVSE when you turn it on. If it has a plug like this, it should be fine, but I don't have enough experience with that version of the hardware and software to say definitively. If it is 3.5T or 3.5A, you're good to go. If it's straight 3.5, you are likely to see the issue I saw, but it is somewhat dependent on the car. If it's 3.3, it should work fine for most cars. It did with both of our EVs. You can tell what software version the EVSE is running by looking at the top of the display as you plug it in. It will briefly show the software version next to the input voltage like this. Along with the fixes for the Mach-E, EV6, and others, 2 operational modes were introduced with the latest version of the software. That's what the 3.5T, 3.5A thing is about. The T stands for Tesla. In my testing with non-Tesla EVs, it didn't matter which mode I used it in. It worked fine for both our cars. But if you have an older Tesla, it will probably work better in the T mode, but newer Teslas might need to flip to 3.5A for it to work properly. Interestingly, that is not unique to this EVSE. Even Tesla's chargers have a legacy mode that can be controlled using dip switches on their EVSE. Flipping the mode is really easy. You just press the A and timer buttons at the same time and it should change and then show the software like this. With the new 3.5A, 3.5T software, it's been working perfectly for me. I've used it in several locations, including a place with 3-phase power setup. It just works the way that it should. The thermals are good. Here are a few images I took after charging for about 5 hours in 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. I have no concerns there. Now let's talk about safety certification. This story here is a little bit more confusing than I wish that it was. But before we get into that, it's probably worth mentioning why I care about safety certification. EVSE pull a lot of power. Things can go bad quickly. EVs are expensive. And even if we weren't in the middle of a supply limited environment at the moment, replacing a burned out charge port would suck. And it would likely be out of pocket. Oh, and they can burn your house down. There are lots of examples out there of cheap EVSEs that cause problems, like this document put out by Nissan around the Mustart EVSE, which can damage the car due to a faulty design. And that's just one example that happens to be very well documented. I also found lots of stories about fairly well-known EVSE rebranders like Lectron that tell scary stories. Certification isn't a silver bullet. I'm sure there are plenty of uncertified EVSE that work just fine, that won't burn your house down or destroy the car. Certification is a nice bit of insurance that if something were to happen, at least you're in a more defensible position. I think it's worth paying a little bit more for that. So what makes it confusing? Well, when it came to market, these EVSE were not certified in any way. There weren't any stickers on the back. I could find no collateral, and when I reached out to Sky Intelligent about it, they did not answer my question. The story has changed since then, but it's still not as clear as I would like it to be. There's different UL collateral on Amazon versus the Sky Intelligent site. That creates ambiguity that I don't like. On Amazon, the seller claims UL certification, but the UL logos on the back of the device aren't UL. And if you search UL's database, it isn't there. Or at least I couldn't find it. So what's all this noise about the need for certification? Why aren't I a hypocrite? If we look at the back of the unit and note that depending on when your EVSE was manufactured, it might not have this sticker. The sticker indicates that there is some level of safety testing and conformity to safety standards for UL and CSA, which is an organization similar to UL that it historically operated out of Canada. It's worth saying out loud that conforms to isn't the same set of words as certified or listed. Here again, we have some ambiguity that I wish didn't exist. If we look at the UL portion, standard 2594 is the correct standard for EVSE, so that is incredibly promising. SGS is a Swiss company that does safety testing and certification. So I reached out to them, and they said something that I wasn't entirely sure how to process. My initial thought was that they were being evasive, whether as a this is how testing companies CYA or something else. I wasn't sure, because I feel like I asked them a direct question and the answer wasn't as direct as I would have liked it to be. I've included our correspondence here so you can read what they said. I wasn't entirely comfortable with this answer, so I did some more digging, indulged in a phone a friend, and what I learned was enlightening. Because the way that I thought it worked isn't the way that the process actually works. And I think that's mostly UL's fault. UL fills two roles in the market. They write the testing standards, and then as a separate entity, they do testing to those standards. But they aren't the only game in town when it comes to testing. Other companies, once certified to test to a specific standard, are just as qualified to perform the testing, listing, certification, etc. It means the same thing. They just can't put the stickers I was expecting to see on the back of the thing. UL's marketing is so good around this process, and probably as an artifact of that, their market share in the testing space is so pervasive that it creates FUD around the topic. Unless you know, like I didn't know, it's too easy to equate the lack of a UL sticker with the lack of proper testing and certification, which is the important part, whether it's been tested to the recognized standard for adequate safety. I'm including some thoughts on the topic from Clipper Creek. because as an established and incredibly well-respected player in the EVSE market, it's interesting that even they felt the need to explain all of this on their website. Clearly, there is confusion around this point that should just not exist. So, as an educated consumer, how do we tell if the stickers on the back of the devices are good enough, that they signal the right things, that the device is safe, has been tested, and we're all good there? As it turns out, there's a fairly easy way to do that, as long as there's a sticker like the one that's on the back of this device. My new process is that I go to the OSHA website. I find the certification company by name. If it's not listed, that's a problem. If it is, like SGS is, click on the name. You can then scroll through the safety standards that they're qualified to test, certify, list against. If it's there, you're good to go, at least from the, is this company qualified to test this standard perspective? If you want to go further, then it's a matter of checking that the company's testing database has the results, which I did with SGS. Here's the certificate for the 40A EVSE. If there isn't a sticker, then it gets more complicated. But there are often ways to run it down, even without having to contact the company directly. In this case, we can use the marketing collateral presented by Sky Intelligent to learn that SGS was the company that was used for testing, and then work through that OSHA SGS process from there. But worst case, you can always reach out to the company and ask to see their homework. When I was shopping hardwired EVSE, I did exactly that and removed a number of options from the shortlist because they didn't provide the right answer. This is one of those things that once you know what threads to pull, you can find the answer. Sky Intelligent even has a section on their website where they clarify these points, similar to Clipper Creek. Why is this buried in the About section and not screamed on the product page? I don't know. It seems like the kind of thing that you shouldn't have to work to find. If you've made it this far, congratulations. This turned out way longer than I would have expected it to. But there was so much good stuff that I learned and wanted to share that it felt wrong to skim over it. So with all of that said, would I recommend this EVSE? Yes, I would. But there is some nuance here, mostly around price. Price is a complicated topic that can't be ignored. But there are two key features that sold it to me and made it worth the price. Cord length and the range of current adjustability. If you travel with it, or you plug in on your driveway where the car can't be in a set spot every time, length matters. I wish that our hardwired EVSE had 5 additional feet of length, and I would have happily paid more for it if that was an option. Adjustability is a more complicated issue. Some EVs let you manage this from the car, so it's not a feature that will matter to everyone. Neither of our EVs provide a level of adjustability that I'm comfortable with. The Mach-E does nothing, and the EV has something, but it's not good enough in my opinion. Having the ability to plug in safely anywhere, as long as I have the right set of adapters, is worth paying for, at least to me. But if you don't need that adjustability, or the 5 to 10 feet of additional cord length versus another EVSE, there are cheaper options available. That's not to say that there isn't room for improvement. It would be nice if the cable handled cold better. That's not a blocker for me here in Chicago, but if I lived in Fargo, it might be. I would also love to see better mounting options. The current one screw on the back thing, it's not awesome. At this price point, there should be a bracket or something that makes it easier to take the weight off the receptacle. I know this is really, really long, so thanks for sticking it out. Hopefully you found all that to be useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll get to them as soon as I can.